All right, guys, we are back. We are back. Hold on a second. I'm just hanging out in the corner over here. I gotta get myself back on. There we go. All right. We are back. Dynamic Man Podcast, episode 22. The future is polygamy. And this is gonna be a spicy topic today, guys. But I feel like there's a lot of things here that I'm trying to get ahead of the curve in conversations I see going to be happening more and more. Um, and I want to talk about the nature of polygamy itself. I want to talk about cultural context around polygamy, trends, and I also want to talk about the different types of polygamy. Okay, so we got three big areas to go into on this topic. If you are here, drop a comment in the chat. Let me know you are watching the polygamy show, the Dynamic Man podcast on polygamy. Um, no, guys, this is a really serious topic. Actually, it's a serious topic um, because society is changing. Society is changing. So let me first get down to the biological nitty gritty of what's been going on. So biological nitty gritty is this: polygamy is not only natural; it is actually how humans evolved. And this goes all the way back to the basic biological differences between men and women. Hello to the chat, Lord Business. Hello, Erin. Back, just a little thing. If you get, like I said, if you guys are here, drop a comment in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. This is how the human species evolved. There's a really great book I read a very long time ago. I think it's by Roy Baumeister. I can't remember exactly. It was pre-cancel culture time. I think he did get canceled, though, for writing about this. He was a very good psychologist. And he talked about the differences between men and women. One of the things that really stood out to me about what he said in his book was about how was two topics that to this day I still think about all the time. The first was that men and women are on average the same, equal in terms of, let's say IQ, cognitive ability. But the bell curve for men stretches out wider than it stretches out for women. So what does this mean? Well, this means that it's the reason why you see feminists talk about how, oh, well, men are at the top. It's a patriarchy. It's because the men are keeping women down. That's not true. It's not true. It's not true biologically, because biologically men are more brilliant than women on the edge of the bell curve. Men have a bigger capacity as a population standpoint to be more brilliant. What you never hear the feminists talk about is that men also have the capacity, actually you do hear them talk about it, but not in a intellectually coherent manner, is that the most retarded and fucked up people in society are also men. So men are the best and the worst. Okay? They're the best and the worst. And there's a reason for this biologically, because a man, if he is exceptional, historically, genetically speaking, could spread throughout the entire gene pool. Because a man can impregnate multiple women. So he gave this example how the woman who was documented to have had the most children ever was this woman in Russia. And I think it was something like she had something like high 40s, low 50s number of children. Crazy number of children for a single woman to have, right? She was having children basically from the time that she was like 14 until the time she was 44. And she had multiple births, right? So she had a couple or three pairs of twins, a pair of triplets. So she was pregnant every, no less than every other year. And he contrasted that to Genghis Khan and the number of men, the number of offspring that Genghis Khan had, which was thousands, 5,000, I think is believed to be the number that he had. And today, I think, like, what is it, 10% of the population of Mongolia can trace descendants from Genghis Khan. So the point here is that a man can spread his genes more through the population than a woman. And in any kind of natural dynamic, partially because of the fighting among men, but what you tend to see happen is small numbers of men will accumulate more women than other men. So you tend to have this curve where some men are getting multiple women, other men are getting no women. And the only way that this kind of social pressure has ever been relieved has been through prostitution. Otherwise, what happens is those men get thrown out of society, they get locked up in prison, they get killed. That's how things have been for long periods of history. And genetically, this makes a lot of sense, right? Because you are having the individuals with the best genes, presumably, right? Because these are the men who are the most intelligent, physically fit, cunning, ruthless, but also pro-social in the sense that they're able to form alliances. So basically, the men who are best equipped to run and move society forward are the ones that have the most children, whereas the ones who fail to form alliances, fail to be able to fight for themselves, fail to be able to bring resources in, et cetera, men who are problems are killed or exiled, and the gene pool benefits from them not being there. And typically what you see happen, actually, even in terms of a consciousness, right, is you have a consciousness created by a culture created by a small number of men that most women follow because women are preservers of the social construct. And then the social construct changes when men from an outside group decide to overthrow the social structure, then the women move towards them. It's actually a lot of what you see going on right now today. And it's why all this stuff that when guys, go crazy about the 19th Amendment, et cetera, women voting, doesn't really matter that much, because women ultimately vote for whoever they feel like are the men with the most power and authority at the end of the day, or the cultural order that those men with power and authority were able to create. I will insert reference here to the fact that the biggest supporters of the Nazi Party were women in Germany. So, point of all this stuff, right? The point of all this stuff is this is the natural order of things. And I think that there is an inherent frustration that exists in a totally open dating market, because you see this natural tendency start to happen. Numbers of women want the same men, and the other men don't have any access. Right now, why don't we have societies that are polygamous then? Why has monogamy become the main social construct? Well, okay, there's a couple of reasons here. First, and this is going to be a little bit more spicy take for some, but Caucasian societies have always had less of a predilection for this. Now, when I say less of a predilection for this, I don't mean that they didn't have it, but it was not as widespread as it was in the Middle East and in Africa, where it's well documented that men would have many, many, many wives. In European society, and I'm talking about even pre-Christianity, because Christianity itself, you can get into some arguments about, certainly if you look at the Old Testament, men had multiple wives. A lot of the idea of a dynamic between one man and one woman, it's a very spiritual basis, but it was also something that was very common in European societies, European tribes, right? So, but just because there was more of that, I think that I'm just spitting from the hip right now, how much of it had to do with higher trust social organization. But there's always been more of an egalitarianism, especially when you get to Northern Europe. That's why you see Scandinavian countries today are always very egalitarian based. It is something in the genetics there. Now, it doesn't mean that the men were not extremely dangerous and that they were not real men, but there was always more respect given to women in their own domains in those societies. Maybe this has something to do with it, but even in European societies, it was always understood that the elite men would have multiple women. That was always understood. The way I have seen it is that a king-like individuals will typically have their queen, and then they'd have, numbers of mistresses. And that was very much accepted even in Christian Europe. It was just a known thing. Okay, he's the king. He's gonna have a lot of women. Some, the Ottomans, the Chinese, they had official harems for the emperors, right? And then you got to the nobility, and the nobility would typically have, I think, I don't want to limit it, because some of the guys were more dogs than others. But let's just say it was very common for a man of means in the aristocracy to have a wife and to have a mistress. Let's just say that. When you started to get more towards the gentry and the middle class, it became much more one man, one wife. And then when you started to get down to the lower, more like working classes, you started to have more. It's when you might still have one man, one wife, but you had higher incidences of cheating going on in those structures. And then you got to the very bottom where the men didn't have any women at all, right? So there was always, even if you want to say in European societies there was less of this, it wasn't super unstable. It's always existed to some degree, and it's always been accepted as existing to some degree. I think a lot of people give Islam crap, but Islam was actually a religion of reform in the context of the Middle East at the time, because in the Hijaz Peninsula, men were having like 10, 12 wives, and everybody, they were not very well cared for. And so Islam in the context of that time period was reforming the practices, because it basically said, hey, look, you can only have up to 4 wives, and you have to be able to care for them all, equally. Now, of course, there's a lot of exceptions in Islam when it comes to like concubines and, sexual treatment of slaves. Just strictly speaking about the wives, you can say that it was an element of reform. Okay, so why am I saying all this stuff? What is the point of it all? Well, the point of it all is that monogamy serves purposes on 2 levels, in my opinion. And not just my opinion, I think it's pretty well documented. The first is a very practical one, which is that if you have too many men who do not have women, then they try to overthrow the social order so they can get women, at least in part. That becomes if not a directly motivating factor these days, a subconscious motivating factor. So in order to create a more stable society, in order to create a more high trust society, you need to give men the opportunity to marry so that they can have sex and that they can work to preserve the system and build. And I think part of this is a mutually beneficial feedback mechanism where you have high trust among the society as a result, and you have less social instability. So when I say polygamy is a natural course of biology, I am not saying it's a civilizing force. Polygamy is not a civilizing force. Polygamy can be tolerated by a civilization with exceptions among the elite, but polygamy as a norm is incredibly socially destabilizing. And it's why the more polygamous a culture, by and large, the more fucked up and retarded it is. The less things work, the less developed it is, because basically people's focus and their energy is completely on sexual acquisition, getting more women, getting more children, rather than on building things. And, having to constantly fend off threats from rivals for those women. So it can be tolerated among the elite and is usually, also kept out of, historically, it was a little bit kept out of public eye in most cases, just to not rub it in people's noses. It's less today, and we're going to talk about that. But the bottom line is that polygamy is not a positive force socially, but it is a natural force. Okay, it's natural to male female dynamics that men want to acquire multiple women to not just simply to sleep with necessarily, but also to raise the children, because there's different variants of polygamy, which we'll talk about. But that that women are going to be drawn to the highest men. Now, anybody in red pill discourse understands exactly that this is what's going on here. French OG had a great little post here. I don't have the entire thing listed, but you're going to get the idea that this is a thing going on in New York City, where you have all these women who are talking about the different men that they're dating, and they're ranking them, right? They're ranking them. As I said, the more women continue down this path, the more they're setting themselves up for polygamy. The thing is, monogamy was working very well because we had strong social institutions that enforced it. It was one man, one wife, and women were essentially married through their fathers or through their community. Now we have women being able to choose their own sexual adventure, and the result of them choosing their own sexual adventure is that they are choosing to be polygamous. The only difference is that because of birth control, they're not having any children from it. So we have like a really fucked up situation here where women don't really want to they don't want to settle for regular guys because their biology tells them you need to go further up. So, I have to say, to a certain extent, it's really women more than men that create polygamy. This is the irony, because women don't like polygamy. Women don't like polygamy because polygamy is, hurtful to their pride, which is understandable to some extent, right? Every woman wants that man, they would prefer that man to be their one and only man, right? They want to have full access to him. But women are far more likely to be like, I would prefer to have a guy who is much more elite than to have a guy who's beneath me. Women hate to be with guys who are beneath them, right? And there's something to be said here. This is, I think, where you get into a lot of like the notch count debate, or that women having a really promiscuous sex life, because what happens is that these women, they go off, and if they sleep with some elite guys, then they don't want to drop down from that later on. Or if they do, he's just beta buck. She's not really in love with him. I think that this stuff gets overstated a lot, because I don't think a lot of these women have necessarily incredible casual sex lives. And what I mean by that is that a lot of it is just like drunken hookups. But there's no question this also happens. There's no question it happens. The bottom line, though, is that we are seeing this phenomenon occur right now in society. We are seeing procreation-less polygamy, where a lot of women will date men who get women who are in good positions, and they're not happy per se about sharing them. But as you can see from our little stock exchange here, they're not giving this up. Now, don't get me wrong. Women have multiple impulses as well, just as men do. And I do think that some women are more inclined towards this sort of behavior or not. I think that the lower social trust gets, the more likely you start to see these polygamous dynamics. But at any rate, some women, though, really do want to just have a single guy, and they're less interested in a guy being elite than that a guy is going to really care for them. And that also may be part of the differences in this stuff, because Girls Chase has talked about this a lot, and I think it's really important. What he's saying is that there are also different mores among different groups, right? That, like, white girls in particular really need to feel much more emotionally understood. They are I'm not saying that they aren't, that don't care about status, that they don't care about material things, but those things, they matter less to them than other groups, proportionally speaking. There needs to be, they need to feel like connected with, like, in some way. There's a little bit more of a romantic element, I think you could say, with it. But as social trust and everything diminishes, that stuff is only increasing. Okay, so what does this mean for where things are going and where we're at right now with this? I mean, Christianity turned it also into a spiritual thing about a man, a woman being together, becoming one. And I agree with this. I think that there are very much spiritual components that are facilitated in a monogamous relationship. I think that that's 100% true. You know, the more people you add to a romantic arrangement, the less, you know, the less spiritually evolved it seems like it can become. I'm not saying it can't become spiritually evolved per se, but you are adding, whenever you add another person into the mix, you are really exponentially adding variables, because you don't have just the relationship between you and those two women to deal with. You have the relationship of the women with themselves. So every time you add another person into the mix, it's really like you're doubling it. So if you have, I'm not going to do the math here. I can't do fast math like that. But if you have a bunch of women, if you have 4 women, you don't just have 4 relationships. You have 16 relationships or something like that you're managing, actually. So it gets more and more complicated as time goes on. Okay. So what does this mean about where things are going? To be honest, I believe that it is going to become more of a real thing. And there's a few reasons why I think it's going to become a real thing. Here's the first reason. The first reason is that the stigma against polygamy does not make any fucking sense in the modern context. Okay? I had a tweet about this the other day. I do not endorse polygamy as a social norm, but why is it less socially acceptable among white people for a woman? I say this among white people specifically because it's not an issue in the Black community to the same extent. Okay? For better or for worse, I was in prison with the gangsters, okay? This is not, they are way more like whatever with this kind of stuff. Why is it less socially acceptable among white people for a woman to be a single mother or divorced than it is for her to share an involved father with another woman? Somehow it's preferable for her to get inseminated at a sperm bank. Monogamy is best for child development. There's no dispute there. But polygamy is so much better than serial divorce, blended families, and sperm bank babies. It's not even funny. Pretty sure the social stigma is the longhouse in action because it makes no sense. I'm telling you guys, it is 100% the longhouse in action. Because notice all of these alternative lifestyles. What is the one thing that all of these alternative lifestyles have in common? Is that it's a woman doing what she wants, right? She's a single worker woman. She decides to go to a sperm bank and select the sperm that she wants to have her baby with. Okay, that is like hypergamy to the extreme. That's like polygamy, except without the father in the picture. Okay. Or you have the ability to divorce. She can trade up for a different guy when she's dissatisfied. I know guys get divorced too, okay? But I'm saying that it benefits women, so it's allowed. Maybe it benefits men too, but it benefits women, so it's allowed. Polyamory, polycule kind of stuff, where women can have multiple different relationships going on. The big thing about these is that there's almost never any babies to it, and there's often multiple men involved in these dynamics, right? We have OnlyFans prostitution. That's, not particularly uncommon at this point in time. What else do we have? You can get divorced. Yeah, you can get divorced, no problem. You can be promiscuous. You can be dating a lot of different people at the same time. No one cares about any of this stuff. You can be 2 gay men. No one cares about this stuff. You mean 2 gay men get a baby. People are starting to care about this stuff. But No one cares. This is acceptable. You have people posting on social media like it's this wonderful thing. I mean, the trans thing was a thing that they were trying to normalize. Like, I'm changing my sexual identity. I'm changing who I am sexually. But heaven forbid, a man has multiple women. Heaven forbid a man has multiple women that he takes care of and that he invests in the family and in the financial development of the children. Heaven forbid you have that, right? Layman Shepherd has a really great thing here. He's saying, nobody cares until children are involved, and with no children, there's no future. The one thing you can say about polygamy, and this is where I'm going to bridge to the next topic. So let me just say this first. Let me finish this thought. Polygamy is the only really stigmatized dynamic right now, because it's perceived, at least, as benefiting men. We're going to talk about the nuance in that. But so for this reason alone, too much weird shit has been introduced into society. Too many different kinds of relationships have been introduced into society that it's only a matter of time before, a man having a few wives, especially because there's a lot more Islamic influence. I know it's Islam coded, but the bottom line is that this influence has come into Western societies at this point, and it is less foreign. It is less like we have lost that high trust where everybody's monogamous, no one gets divorced social structure. But I just want to talk practically speaking. And again, I am supportive of monogamy as the main social dynamic. Okay. I am 100% a monogamist with this kind of stuff. I believe it is the correct social arrangement under normal circumstances. And I think it's what you do to build society. Okay. But what I am saying here, and this is important, is that in the grand scheme of things, polygamy is so much less worse than every single other thing that has been introduced into society. There is really no moral leg to stand on that it should be stigmatized against at all. Because even if you put monogamy right here, polygamy is clearly right here, followed by everything else. Like, how are we supposed to say here? Supposed to say here that monogamy is this golden thing when you have people getting divorced all the time? Now, I've said many times people get divorced because they don't know what they're doing, and this is true. But there's a social dynamic here as well, that in a healthy society, not everybody needs to know every single thing that they're supposed to do, because society helps them to take care of it. Now you have to actually learn and understand, and then you can minimize your divorce rate. You can take it very low to, I think Stefan Molyneux said 5%. I agree with him on that. I think that's actually the right number. If you know you can't ever completely eliminate risk, but I think if you really know what you're doing, you can bring your divorce rate down to about 5%. But we don't have a society that mitigates divorce. We have a society that actually facilitates it. So like everything else, if you want to be healthy and have things that are good in life, you are up against a massive wall of bullshit and corruption coming your way. So monogamy is great, but we clearly do not have a society that even promotes monogamy. We have a society that promotes, frankly, chaos. And I'm sorry. And look, I work with many divorced people. I'm not disrespecting divorced people, because I understand, and they frankly understand why they got divorced in most cases. But how is it a better arrangement for someone to get married to a single woman, get divorced, and then marry somebody else and have kids with them, have a blended family? How is that better for child development than a man who simply has a few wives, but is with them all and takes care of them all and is involved in the kids' lives? You can't make strong arguments for this stuff. And so the reason I'm trying to say this stuff is that you can say that monogamy is the way things should be. But monogamy has been really, you can't have a real coherent monogamous culture when you have hookup culture, when you have women going on apps, fucking guys left and right who are, these chads or whatever, and then they want to try to go and have a monogamous relationship. You can't have a society that lives like that and then say that polygamy is a bad social arrangement. You can't say it. Your society is too fucked up for you to say that kind of stuff. Okay? So this is the problem here. I think that the left, through all their liberalism, has killed the stable structure of society and stable dating arrangement that monogamy provided. And so I think as we return to stability, what are you going to do with this dating market that is totally out of sync? What are you going to do with this dating market that's completely out of sync? Because you only have so many people. You have maybe 50% of the population is getting into monogamous relationships. What is happening to the other 50% of the population? The monogamous couples themselves maybe are having 2 to 3 kids. The other ones are not having any kids. So you're taking this social market, this dating market that's totally fucked up, and then you're taking the next problem, which is that we're facing a demographic crisis. So if you're in, especially an East Asian or European society, you're dealing with birth rates under replacement, sometimes dramatically under replacement. Putting even aside all the immigration stuff, you are dealing with that problem itself, right? So there is a push and a need that's growing in those populations that we have to have more children. How are you going to have more children? Well, I think monogamous couples are going to carry a lot of the weight with this, but I don't think it's going to be very surprising, especially when you throw in the element of technology and people like a lot of guys just sort of like disconnecting, not really feeling like they have much of a future. You're kind of creating the circumstances where the lower parts of men are disappearing. There's been stuff going up all over Twitter recently talking about how you go to these dating events and how there's no men there. It's all women. Okay. I'm just telling you, at a certain point, especially when there's a big movement to start having babies, women are going to want not just simply to sleep with the best guys, but a lot of them are going to start accepting arrangements where they are one of multiple women, so long as they can be taken care of, as long as the man has an influence in their life. They're going to start to be willing to share that. I can tell you that this is coming. I don't know, again, that polygamy is a good social structure for developing a civilization, but I will tell you that polygamy will provide short-term stability, demographically speaking, and short-term stability to the dating market that is too messed up. And I think what'll happen is you're going to start to see a lot more of it as we go through the rest of the decade, because the stigma is going to fall apart. There may even be considered to be some degree of a social need around it, possibly. I'm not saying it's going to be normalized or it's going to be promoted, but the point here is that you are going to see more of it happening, and you're going to see more people having kids with it. And I don't know how it's going to be responded to, but I think a lot of this, it's not going to be like, at this point in time, it's like, after you had transgenderism, are people really going to have an issue with conservative polygamists having like families of like 10 kids who are growing up in like stable households? I mean, people are not going to like it. There's a lot of people who are not going to like it, but I do think to some extent it's going to be more accepted. And I think it's mostly transitional too, because when you start to get to a point where society gets to develop better, social trust returns, things will start to stabilize out. But I think polygamy is a natural response to chaotic conditions. It is a natural, I'm going to say that again, it is a natural response to unstable conditions, because women will move two men who have things under control in a period where the social structure is falling apart. I think social trust 100% returns. Social trust returns when order is returned. When order is returned. So once, if women can start to trust the guys they're in the polygamous arrangement with, then, and you know, of course, you also have, I don't think polygamy is ever going to be big. I'm just saying that, is it going to reach a point where it's like, where there's 5, maybe 10% of the population, you have some of this going on? I think that you could get there. I think you could get there. You get monogamy 50, 60%, and then you have another 5%, the 10% polygamous. I think that you could, I could totally see that happening during a transitional period. I could totally see it happening during a very transitional period. That requires very harsh things to happen. Bow-tied surfer, my friend, if you don't see harsh things coming on the horizon, I'll tell you, there's a lot of harsh changes that are going to be happening throughout society. So I view polygamy as something that may occur in a short time horizon for like a generation. I'm going to give you guys a historical example, okay? Because this is actually really, really interesting. It's one of my favorite examples in history. It's from a super obscure war. Okay, so this is called the War of the Triple Alliance. It sounds like something like out of like Lord of the Rings. The War of the Triple Alliance. It was a war that happened in the 1880s between Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina, supported by the United Kingdom, against Paraguay. Okay, so if you're thinking like, what the fuck is going on with this war? How are you going to have Argentina, Brazil backed with the United Kingdom, backed by, you know, okay, Uruguay is not big itself, but you have 3 major powers and a minor one against 1 minor power. How are you, what's going to happen in that war? Well, I'll tell you what happened in that war. 80 to 90% of the Paraguayan male population died. They were under a military dictatorship, and they fought bravely, basically to the last man. And the only reason Paraguay even survived as a country is because the president, who I believe was Grover Cleveland, but I can't know that for certain, I don't remember for certain, he intervened diplomatically. He actually got did he get a peace prize for that? I don't know if that was before the peace prizes. He got some sort of like award or acclaim for that. But basically, he negotiated an end to the conflict. Argentina took large chunks of Paraguay, but didn't take the entire country because it was almost didn't exist. Anyway, what is the point of me saying all this stuff? So many men had died in that war, and so many of the ones who survived were crippled, that the Catholic Church granted dispensation for the men there to marry multiple women. Some men had up to 13 wives in that generation, and Paraguay's population completely recovered, right? I use it as an example because obviously that society underwent some extremely chaotic conditions and disruption, but things restabilized. Essentially, if you have a lot of women who are looking for a man and you only have a small number of men who can provide what those women need, then you are going to see polygamy become more supported in that society to stabilize the arrangement. Now, over time, as that next generation comes up, presumably in better conditions, right, then you are going to see polygamy diminish again. If the society is rising, if the society is falling, you're going to see higher levels of polygamy. So again, when I'm talking about polygamy, I'm talking about it not to say like men should become polygamous, you know, in the sense that this is the natural order. You are really only, if you care about society, this should be something that's very niche, specific circumstances, specific time periods. If you're someone like Elon Musk, if you're someone like Andrew Tate, you can do it, right? You can do it. But, and society doesn't necessarily suffer from it, except insofar as it's promoted too much, because again, it's antisocial in this broader sort of selfish context, but it's pro-social in a short-term thing. It's a natural equilibrium. That's basically what I'm trying to say here. We're at a point now where the women cannot handle not finding any eligible men. So they are willing to make compromises. Now, what compromises are they willing to make? When you combine this with the demographic issues and the changing values around family, I think a lot of women are going to go. It was Hayes. Thank you. Rutherford Hayes. Yeah, it wasn't Grover Cleveland. It was Hayes. They are going to resort to this. Okay. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I feel pretty strongly that as we become more conservative in Western countries, more focused on demographics, and the dating market seeks to reassert stability, I think that you are going to see more instances of polygamy occur. That's my prediction. It's my prediction. Now, the last topic I want to talk about here is what are the, how do I put this? What are the types of polygamy? So there are, I think that there are two different poles of polygamy. Two different poles, as in there's two different styles, let's say, and there's blending in between this. The first style is the style, I call it like the harem style, which is really when you are a very powerful man, right? And that's the kind of style that Elon Musk and that Andrew Tate have, where the women essentially live and have their own house provided for them by the powerful man, who may or may not consider those women a wife or something else, but they basically provide for these women, and the woman has their own house, and the man visits each of these different households. The man visits the households for sex, to see the kids, goes to another household, does not live with the women, does not live with any individual woman. A variant of this is when he does live with one individual woman, but then visits the other houses. But the reason the man doesn't typically do that is because what is the major issue that you have to deal with polygamy? The major issue you have to deal with polygamy is female jealousy. So if you are going to be polygamous successfully, and by the way, I'm not talking about like our selected kind of polygamy. I don't, it's not polygamous if you're just the guy who goes and sleeps with the woman, gets her pregnant, and disappears. That's not polygamy. That's being like a man whore. That's a R selected, if we go from RK selection theory. It's not high parental investment. The man, though, who is going to the different houses, it's closer to that spectrum because he's not physically living with the children. And, I think your mileage may vary. Some of these men may be pretty involved. I've known a couple stories, and one of the guys is actually a J6er. His father had 3 families. Now, they didn't know about each other, but he had 3 families, 2 kids in each family. Eventually, of course, it all blew up. That was the thing that men pulled off. I knew a Russian girl in college who's had her father had the same thing. She had a whole other family. He had a whole other family that she didn't know about. So that used to be easier to pull off before like social media and stuff like that. But bottom line is those kids had no idea that their father had different families. So it certainly puts into perspective that they felt like their father was an invested father. Meanwhile, he had a whole other family who was doing this. And you guys, and so many of you guys are saying you can't handle a woman. So many of you guys are saying you can't handle the responsibilities. Look at this guy. These guys have I guess it was back in the boomer days, right? Where you could actually afford that. You could not only afford to get one house, you could afford to get 3, right? 3 houses, 3 different pairs of kids with, 3 little cars in the garage and the white picket fence. No, it's pretty crazy. Just become a traveling salesman, and you got to go away for work for a couple days each week, and you're actually just seeing your other family. It's pretty crazy. So that's one of the iterations of polygamy, where you basically have different households of women, and the women do not interact with each other, and you go and visit those different households. And I think that household, that dynamic, I think, first off, it allows you to have, if you have a lot of money and you're a very busy man, it seems to be a natural kind of thing. You also keep the women out of each other's hair. But what I want to talk about with this dynamic is that in this dynamic, it's a low trust polygamous dynamic. In this dynamic, the women, I don't want to say they always hate each other necessarily, but they are not, they are rivals. Okay. They are rivals. And to the extent that they work together, they might work together tactically to try to get something from you. From what I heard, I was talking with like a lot of the black guys in prison. Some of these guys were big gangsters and they had multiple different wives. They called them wives, and they had families. And I would hear about this drama all the time, and how, they'd often be working against each other, but then sometimes they work together against him. And then one would backstab the others, and it was drama and shifting alliances, right? The benefit, of course, of this is that you have, they have different households, they have space from each other, so they don't necessarily go in and kill each other, right? Although I guess they could theoretically, but they're out of each other's hair, literally. The other dynamic is, I think, harder to create, but far less destabilizing, and far better from like a parental investment perspective, because the father in these cases, he's almost like a distant figure. I don't want to say that it's not like the father isn't in their life, right? But he is not in the household on a regular basis. So to the extent he disciplines, he can discipline the kids, and he does, but he does it almost through some of like the image he has of being this different, distant individual. And to some extent, I guess in an ideal world, the man could direct things more with, with his money. But the reality is that a lot of these women, it's hard if the woman's running that individual household. It's very hard for the man to have like his hand on things that are going on and to keep a steady ship. So, I think Elon Musk, for instance, with his kids, what is his involvement in those kids' lives? He sees them, but he's not a regular presence. I don't think that men have to necessarily be as much of a regular presence if they have a very powerful image that the child can kind of almost create like a hero identity around. The image almost becomes the father. But I'm still not saying it's better. The other arrangement is like a sister wives arrangement. And the sister wives arrangement is much more stable if you can get it. It's a very high trust arrangement. And in this arrangement, what's different is that in the sort of harem arrangement, the man is picking these different women. He wants the different women. The women don't really have much of a say in it, if at any say at all. He's picking the women he wants to pick, and she's just got to deal with it because he's the one who's taking care of things. The sister wives situation is different, because in the sister wife situation, the women all live together with the man. They might have separate domiciles on one location. They have their own rooms in a house at a minimum, but they are effectively living together and raising all the kids together. I think this is a really good dynamic if you can pull it off, because what tends to happen in the sister wives situation is that everything is done by mutual consent, and very often the women themselves are the ones who introduce the other woman into the situation. This is much more of a Mormon arrangement, and I think it's kind of interesting because we were talking about how in European culture it wasn't so common to have polygamy, and that there was more egalitarianism. It seems kind of interesting that this is the sort of polygamy that is more natural to those kind of societies, or that, at least the Mormons seem to have, they've done that for a long time, and there's still breakaway Mormon communities that do it. Sister wives, in these situations, the woman, and that's a euphemism typically, although sometimes it really does come from the same family. They're sisters in terms of how they act towards each other, but sometimes they are actually biological sisters, or they're cousins. And it creates a much more cohesive family unit where the women negotiate a lot of things among each other. The women decide which other women are appropriate to introduce to the dynamic. A man might also propose a woman, but he's not going to have that woman enter in unless the other wives agree to it. So it's kind of an interesting thing, right? It's an interesting dynamic, very high trust, because everybody's on the same page, everyone's consenting to it. And of course, the man still has to balance the relations between the women, but the women also sort things out amongst themselves. A lot of issues, from what I understand, sexually, that happen between in those arrangements, that the women will alternate nights. Everything's very much scheduled. So, okay, you have him tonight, I have him tomorrow night. He comes, and it's just a cycle, and everybody agrees with it. They're on the same page. And it reduces confusion, essentially. So, yeah, interesting stuff. So, where is it going to go? I guess we'll see where it's going to go. I think we'll see mixtures of both types as time goes on. I think we'll see mixtures of both types. And like I said, I want to emphasize right now, let's say we're at 50% people getting married. That number is going to go up, first of all. And that's my big vision here, because I'm going to say it one more time. Monogamy produces the best civilizations. It produces the best civilizations. Polygamy on a healthy civilization can only be tolerated in small amounts among the elite. But I expect, as part of the restabilizing of society, we are going to see some polygamous arrangements come in. And I think you're going to see a decline in a lot of the a corresponding decline in a lot of the super degenerate other types of sexual arrangements. Because sexual arrangements that, like, the difference between polygamy and these other sexual arrangements is polygamy leads to children, right? Polygamy leads to children. It does not lead to just sexual gratification. Polygamous arrangements really are not even supposed to have the women do anything with it's not supposed to be like a threesome if you have two wives. It's supposed to be you and the individual wives on separate circumstances, right? So I think we're going to see more of it happen. Probably not more than 5% of the population, but it's not going to become. It'll be as common as your gay couple. Let's put it that way. It'll be common as that gay couple that you see around. I think that we could definitely get to that point where, which is not super unusual. It means you'll have definitely a number of them in any given town. So, any other questions you guys have? Drop it in the chat. There's one thing I wanted to say here. I wanted to look at here. I thought was interesting, but I didn't have a chance to really read it. Let me see here. Sustaining civilization, we've seen polygamy fail long-term in the past, which is why we reach monogamy. Is the idea maybe that we need to go through a macro season of polygamy to stabilize and only then bring? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is exactly correct. Yeah. That we need to go through a macro season of polygamy to stabilize and only then bring monogamy back, multi-generational course correction. I think, it's like we are bringing it back. I think it's just naturally what's going to happen. It's what I see occurring. And there's going to be some stigma around it, like there is any kind of stigma. But in the end, I don't think it's going to be considered as socially destructive. Let me put it this way. The demographic situation really is bad. And as the demographic situation gets on people's minds and people start to really think about babies and saving society, so long as it's not like so long as it's actually pro-family, I think not everyone's going to be okay with it, of course. It's still going to be seen as different. Some people may view it through a religious lens as bad. But I think that you're going to see more of it glossed over. I mean, say it again, like we've had to go through LGBT stuff. This is much more traditional than that. and much more pro-social than that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with it. But let me see if I got any other comments here. Won't there be a level of disgust, especially from the rise of more religious younger generation? I think that I think you're totally right. I think that some people, in many of the more Christian circles, are going to have a really hard time with it. But in the same way that you've seen online a lot of Christians of different groups, so like you have Catholics and Protestant evangelicals and Orthodox, and then you have pagans. They've all kind of had this, like, they all have very different opinions on things, but I think that they've all kind of come together for the bigger picture on most discourses here. By and large, I think you're going to see that same sort of thing happen when it comes to polygamy. I think, if you have individuals who are coming in who are still pro-West, pro having children, pro preserving society, and fighting back against the rot, against society, you're gonna have people who don't like it and they're gonna rebel against it. But in the grand scheme of things, it's like people are not going to view it, I think, as the main enemy. It's kind of like, and that's why I also believe that as a generational thing, it will start to fade out as society becomes more stable, because it's not going to, first off, you're just not going to have the same pool of women. Like what I would posit to some of these, Christian guys is, if you have a bunch of women who are looking, who want to become more conservative, and they want to have kids, and they want, to help, but like there's no men who are there for them, or should they just not have kids when society needs them to have kids, and then they're willing to be taken care of? And I think these are questions, these are arguments that are going to come up. They're going to come up over time because they're real arguments. They're real arguments. I mean, it's like, you don't want a woman who's been raped. Okay, well, if you're Germany after World War II and the Soviets raped 1 million women, I mean, no one talks about that, but that happened. That happened. There was over 1 million rapes in Germany, mostly from Soviet soldiers after World War II. Conditions dictate acceptable morality. And my take is that while you're always going to have some people who disapprove and are dogmatic no matter what, on balance, I think most are going to at least understand, even if it's still weird for them, they're going to at most understand. I mean, let me put it this way. Did anybody give a shit when Elon Musk had, multiple kids? Like, no one cared, because Elon Musk, at least at the time, was doing things. Elon Musk was doing things that supported MAGA. So there's like not a single conservative. I don't want to say not a single conservative, but no meaningful conservative or MAGA person cared at all. And also, what are people supposed to say? You're divorced. You've got kids by 2 different women because you fucked up. Like some guys got kids by 2 different women and he didn't fuck up, but so he's worse than you. I understand that the religious arguments are that there was 1 woman at a time, right? And they repented and they're not continuing to do, the quote unquote sin. But I'm just saying, in the context of the period, I think people are going to be like, look, I'm pulling my weight. Like, I think polygamists, if you're like, the best thing is that you get married in your early 20s to another religious girl and you guys have 10 kids together. That's the best thing that's going to happen. But that's not going to be everybody's experience. So is it bad for a guy? Is it bad for a guy who takes some, I don't like, I just think these are going to be conversations that have. This is great. It's hard to whine about polygamists producing children when we are growing fewer and producing none. Small number of voices are hardly a leg to stand on. This is the real deal here. Like, most of the people who are going to be criticizing it, haven't really built. I wonder how much of it is going to be like a Nietzschean kind of like, we're blaming you for doing this because like you're a bad person, but they didn't pull their weight. They didn't have any kids, or they had like one kid, or they got divorced, but now they're a really serious believer, and so you're a bad person. You know, at the end of the day, does that person have more in common with somebody? You know, if you're a truly Christian pro-family structure and you have, 6 to 8 kids, and somebody has 2 wives and he has 6 to 8 kids, who's going to have more in common with each other? So, I mean, and this is I think another thing here. All the more reason these less traditionals will take over. Men will flock to them because of how the church treats men. You fuck up once, you have to marry outside the faith to have a family. This is true. There is a real growing resentment among men how the church treats them, because the church has been feminized itself, right? So the strongest arguments against polygamy are going to come from the monogamists who marry young and have lots of children. And I think that those monogamists are going to have the best arguments. They're going to have the best arguments. They're going to have the money where their mouth is. But I think because they have skin in the game, they are paradoxically going to be some of the least critical of the groups, because they're going to say, look, at the end of the day, I get it. We're all having children. We're all trying to raise this in a good structure. And I also think some of this is going to depend on what type of polygamy, right? The type of harem polygamy, they're not going to resonate with, because that's much more materialistic and secular. I don't know how the one that resembles more of like the Mormon polygamous stuff, like the sister wives thing, I don't know how much of an issue that's going to be, because those households are going to tend to be much more religious than the other ones. I think if you see very wealthy men with multiple, wives or baby mamas, that's going to happen from the more secular side of things. They're not going to be particularly religious. But the ones who have the sort of full-on patriarchal household, even if there's multiple women there, I think that's a different story, to be honest. I think it's a different story. They may end up having a lot more common ground. Just for America, or Euro phenomenon too? I think, look, it's a good question. I think it's going to be across the West at the end of the day, because it doesn't, where it happens in one place, it happens in the other. The West is too interconnected here, and the demographic issues are too similar. The dating cultural issues are too similar. The dating market in the Anglosphere is a little more messed up. It's much more also culturally acceptable in continental Europe to have mistresses. But again, if the focus is on babies, I just think you're going to see a lot of changes. And I think whatever, if it's starting in America, it's going to spread over to Europe too. It's going to spread over to Europe. I think it's just part and parcel with the growing identitarianism. Nothing is more manly and traditional than having 2 children, maybe, and then castrating yourself. Yeah. Yep. All right, guys. Well, this was a fun stream. Thank you guys for sticking around. We're going to see what the next few years bring, but the bottom line is expect the unexpected. Expect the unexpected. When populations are in crisis, they become willing to do things that under normal circumstances they would not do. And that is true in many different domains. Just reiterate it one last time, you take the demographic issues in the messed up, resetting dynamics between men and women, the number of, women who can't find men, the growth of technology taking men out of the market, and drugs. You literally have, I'm gonna use this analogy. You literally have all of these variables and all that's required is a little heat. And you put a little heat on it, and you have the chemical combination to produce it. That to me is polygamy. All of the raw material for this to happen is there. It's just a matter of the heat getting turned up and the idea getting pushed. And I just don't think the morality idea has really, aside from like a religious perspective, if you don't believe that, I don't think that there's a real morality issue given what else we've condoned in society. There's no way to me you can say it's more appropriate for a woman to get sperm from a sperm bank than it is for her to share a man under a structure with, you know what I mean, with another woman. There's no way you can tell me that this is remotely okay. It's literally just propagandizing. That's all it is. It's much more okay for you to be gay and to live with another gay person and get married to them, but it's not okay for you as a man to have 2 wives and take care of them and raise children. This stuff is just, it's too retarded for me, guys. It's too retarded. And I understand the Overton window isn't there yet, but men are going to start to, the men who have the access are going to start to want it. And the women are going to start to want it too, once they realize that having babies is the next big thing. Actually, you know what, guys? I think the really big variable that stopped it from happening right now is just the laws. So when the pressure gets to a point that there's some kind of change in the laws when it comes to like child support and things, I'm not saying to get rid of child support, but there's obviously a lot of issues with laws as they stand. When that happens, I think that you're going to start to see it break out much more, because before that, you're really dealing with a lot of, you have to get legal arrangements done. It's just difficult. There's a lot of risk involved. Josh, I have heard this as well, and I'm really curious what you have to say about this, because obviously in the Bible, in the Old Testament, polygamy is extremely common. It's actually mandated. In the Old Testament, if your brother died, you had to marry his wife, right? And there was a lot of this sort of marrying women from the same family, which makes sense historically because you kind of create clannish family structures that way. And, the sister-wife dynamic really makes a lot of sense in that. Even if it's not their exact children, there's still more blood relation. It's like their nephew. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of genetic reason that they would be supportive of it. You have less likelihood that they're going to try to kill your rival's child, which of course happened to the kings and the harem dynamics, where you'd have these different groups and they would start to kill each other. So anyway, but Josh, you can message me that on X, because I'd be very curious to hear about this, because I've heard this before, that actually it has to do with, it's almost like an assumption within Christianity, and then it's not very explicit that it's a sin. But I am not a biblical historian, so I should be really curious to know about that. So anyway, guys, that by the way, that doesn't mean that people are going to accept it, because people have their own interpretations, but that's interesting stuff. All right, guys, have a great day, and I will see you on the next Dynamic Man podcast. Take care.